Hello, everybody. My name is Phil Conrad, instructor for CS48, Spring 20, UC Santa Barbara. I'm here with my TA, Scott Chow, and I want to explain one of the features of the Project Idea Reviewer Next.js code. I'm just going to jump right in by doing npm run dev, which starts up the local server. And we're going to go ahead and open that up here on localhost 3000. And one of the features of this app, let me go ahead and log out here and log in again. And I'm going to log in with my PhDCon at UCSB account, which is defined in this app as an admin. And you'll see that the admin menu comes up, and I have manage admins and manage students. And I can also, excuse me, I can also go to admin admins, so sort of force that into the web browser there, and it takes me to the admin page, just the same as if I had navigated to it by just selecting it on the menu here. So if I navigate, it goes to admin admins, but I can also just type in admin admins, and it takes me there. But here's the cool thing. Suppose that I log out, and I try to go to admin admins. Shouldn't let me, right? Because I'm not logged in. But more than not letting me, it actually redirects me to the login page. And if I log in with a correct admin, well, it actually doesn't take me to the admin page, which is, but the fact that it redirects me to the login page is pretty cool. Also, what if I log in as someone that does not have admin access? So if I log in as this other email address, which does not have admin access, and I try to go to admin admins, it redirects me to the home page. It doesn't let me go to that route. How is this happening? So that's the question that I put to Scott in a previous video. And we weren't quite able to come up with the explanation, but Scott thinks he has the explanation now. So Scott, I've got the code up here. Where should I go?
So let's go to admin admins, the place you attempted to access.
Start with under pages, admin admin. So this is the client side code, the React code for that page. And where should I go on this page or on this file?
There's so the good news is that the only thing we really care about in this file is right up here at the top. This getServerSideProps. But I need to explain one concept first, which is the fact that Next.js organizes itself into pages, right? Now, the reason this is important is because this is no longer just a React app, right? If you were thinking just a React app, it's a single app that runs, all the code gets shipped at once, yada, 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 right? Like it's, you get all of the code at once, like emphasis on that. The problem with the Next.js app is that things are, you get your components divided into pages, right? So each one of these pages, right, under pages, as declared here in your file structure, every single JavaScript or React component we export as the default of a file is considered a page, right? This is all Next.js stuff. You don't get this in React, right? So this is Next.js imposing structure on a React project, right? So the reason this is important is because Next.js will serve out each of these pages when you navigate to them in your browser, right? Which is slightly different than what would happen in a React app. The reason I bring this up is because technically every time you go to a new page in your Next.js app, you actually talk to the server to get the next page. This means that in that short window when you're asking for the next page, there is time on the server where you can actually ask the server to get stuff for you in order to fill out data on the page.
Oh,
right?
So let me just jump in. So I think what I just understood is, although this is client-side code, there's a little bit of an opportunity to do some things on the server side when you're first loading the page?
Precisely.
Okay.
So this is when the page, so Next.js does something called, well, it does something called pre-rendering, right? And pre-rendering is a very fancy way to say it generates the HTML, the base HTML, to send to the client, to your laptop, to your computer, right? Now, what's important about this is that you have two options, either two ways you can go here. You can either send that base HTML and then later fill in all the data, or you can tell Next.js, no, I actually want you to fill out all, and that first process is called hydration because it hydrates it with data. The second option is, no, I want you to I want you to retrieve some information first, and then only once you've retrieved that information can you send this page out. And that is called server-side rendering, right? So.
Is that what the SSR stands for here?
Yes, server-side rendering, exactly. So getServerSideProps means that this, if I declare and export this function with this name, the server-side props right here, if I export an async function with this name, what happens is that next detects that there exists this getServerSideProps function. Before it loads, before it sends out your page, it will first call getServerSideProps. Once it gets the return value of this server-side props, which in this case is a promise, as we discussed in our last video, it will then pass that promise. It will evaluate that promise and then eventually pass it to the page component. So if we go all the way down to the bottom, sorry, maybe a little bit too far. Go up to the top of this. Yeah, here we go. Those values will be passed to props eventually, right? Because this is the export default. So this is the page, right? This is the page component, right? So that, in that case, we are rendering on the server side. We are basically filling out all the data on the server side. Now, there's a really rich discussion here on like why you want to do server-side rendering and when you don't want to. There's, speed and performance concerns that all come into this. We are here to solely discuss one thing, which is how do you prevent bad guys from getting to from never even seeing the page?
Right.
Right. Which is why it needs to be done server side.
Got
right?
it. So let me just pause for a minute, just for anyone who's sort of like needs the big picture here. So we are in pages, admins. This is the export default function, manage admins page. And just like most things under pages that aren't under API, what you're mainly doing here is returning a React component. In this case, the React component you're returning is a layout, which gives us the whole web page. And in this particular page, we have a form here where you can create a new admin. Actually, that form goes all the way down to here. You can put in a new email for a new admin. And then we have a bootstrap table. And if we actually look at the page looks like this. If I log out and log back in again, so log back in and go to this page, admin, manage admins. There's the form to create a new admin. Here's the table with all the admins. And if I go back to the code, there's the form, there's the bootstrap table. And I think if I understand correctly, the data for the actual bootstrap table is coming from this use SWR. Is that right?
Yes. So we are only pre-rendering the user information and whether or not the user is allowed to access this front end page.
Right.
That is all we're doing.
Yeah. So this up here where we're doing get admins, this is not the get admins for rendering the table. This is simply a get admins to find out whether or not this particular user is allowed to see this page at all.
Actually, let's break this down a little bit. So there are two things that are actually going on here.
Okay.
So the answer is it's doing both.
Okay.
There's both retrieving, because you'll notice that we fill out the props initial data here with await get admins, right? we are actually filling out the initial data of this server-side rendered page
Okay.
with getAdmins, and we are
Okay.
also going ahead and serializing it to the correct shape, right?
Okay. So we
So
are
that's
actually getting the initial data to fill out the React.
we are,
Okay.
but we don't need to. This line doesn't need to be here.
Got it.
Doesn't need to be here. It would just mean when we first load the page, we would see an empty table, and then the data would come in.
Got it.
Right? So that's let's split the two. So that's line 18. Line 18,
Okay.
you can take it or leave it, right?
Got it.
What's interesting though is this create required auth right here will basically return to you. So if we click on create required auth, right, we are telling it that we need to have this role admin. That's the first thing we've told it, right? It will build us a function such that if the user has this role, it will allow the user in, right? It'll just return props user, right? And this is the high level. I'll explain in more detail what the actual contract is, but like the high level is it'll let the user in. Otherwise, it's going to bounce the user out to this home directory.
And so when I first started today, we showed how it would bounce if the user wasn't authorized to see the page. It would just bounce you to the home page. Or it would, if you weren't logged in, it would bounce you to API login and force you to log in.
Precisely. This is where this is forcing you to log in, right? So yeah, there's definitely a few things there. Now, the contract this is attempting to fulfill, right? Because this is a server side. Now, what's confusing about this is if we go back to admins, right? Is that we have here in front-end code, we have code that's being run on the back end. I want to stress this. This is code that's being run on the back end, which is the only reason I said before that you're not allowed to call back-end code from the front end. This is back-end code in a front-end file, but that's the only time you're allowed to call back-end functions directly, right? This is back-end. Everything that's not in getServerSideProps is front-end code.
And
right?
This getServerSideProps is a special name.
It's a special name for Next.js that Next.js knows. It's not React. This is Next.js, right?
And it has to be called exactly this.
Precisely. It has to be called exactly that. It has to be exported as a named export called getServerSideProps, right? So what the server-side props needs to do is, let me pull up the documentation here so I don't mess this up. But the server-side props will receive, or its sole purpose is to return the props that should be passed to the component. So if we scroll down, right, the sole purpose, right, is to fill out this props variable, right? That's the only goal at the high level, right? You can do other things though with getServerSideProps. So if we go up to the top.
Oh, and before we go to that, we see right here, what we're doing is we're taking this props and we're unpacking it into user and initial data. And the user is the part where, let's see, the user came from create_requiredOff.
Yes, the user will come from create_requiredOff.
SSR.user was, or rather SSR.props.user was set inside of here.
Exactly.
And so let's just see that for a moment. If we go back to create_requiredOff, in fact, you see inside, we created an object called props, and inside of props, there is user.
Exactly.
Whereas if we go back now to pages, admins, here we're setting SSR props initial data, and we're setting that by actually calling getAdmins, which is actually a function that is in API admins that is defined on the server side. And so that, we call that, and then we map that to serialized document. And serialized document comes from utils
Utils,
MongoDB.
MongoDB, exactly. So get server-side props. This is well defined in the nextjs docs for under basic features, and it's under data fetching. Essentially, if you wanted to always fetch your data before you ever rendered a page, then this is another way you can address this. Potentially, you could never use something like use SWR, and you could always retrieve your data beforehand. There's a performance concern with that, but just to throw it out there, that is one way you could solve that problem. The other thing to note is that right here, these request and response objects are coming from the bigger object being passed into this, which is called context. And context has, in addition to request and response, it has a query string, it has the preview, and it has params from the URL, right? Or from the dynamic wrap. Now, there's a bunch of words there, right? But the important thing is that if you look at the documentation, you'll see it takes a context object. On that context object, you can get .request and .response, right? And then you're just like a backend function again with the request and response and filling out the request and response accordingly. That's what allows, if we go into create RequiredOff, that is what allows us to actually set the response to do a 302. Because if all we were doing was returning a prop, right, that would not alone be enough to redirect us, right? We have to have the ability to send to the browser a 302 response, right? So we are basically, we would say, instead of sending the React page, instead send a 302 response. That's what we've done here, right? And that's what we've done with this write head location and res response.end. It says, no, this response is now finished. No more adding React stuff. No more adding any of this nonsense. We are ending it, right? That's the reason that it doesn't have to return like a null user or something like that in order to trigger a redirect. It's because we forced the redirect here.
All right, cool. So I think we've basically explained how this create required auth gives us the functionality that you can, and if you set it up the way it is set up in, for example, pages admin. So let's go back to that. If you put this await create required auth in your get server-side props, and you define the role that you need, that the user needs to have in order to be able to access that page, it will either require them to log in, or it will, if they're not logged in, or redirect them to the home page if they don't have the proper role. We've also made reference to the fact that you can also, in get server-side props, set some initial data. We've done that here with await getAdmins map serialized data. That initial data is then used down here. We can pull in that initial data, and presumably somewhere in here, let's see where that initial data is used. Here. Got it. So with the use SWR API admins, we are passing initial data, but that takes us into use SWR, which is a whole other video. So we will just skip over that for now. For now, it's just enough to know that if you want to check whether a user has the right role and either force them to the login page or force them to the home page if they don't have the right role, you can do that here in get server-side props with this await create required auth. I think that's probably enough for this video. Scott, is there anything else we should cover, or is this a good place to stop?
I think the only other thing I would say is if we like showed index.js, which is not a locked page, quote unquote, then you'll notice that this instead uses optional auth. which is a way of essentially declaring, oh, now auth is optional. And that's
Gotcha.
just yet another server-side render function that we've passed.
Yes, let's just take a look at that one right quick. So this optional auth, as you can see, this is sort of in contradistinction to RequiredOff. It has a similar shape, but much, much simpler. Here we await getUserSession, and if there's a user, we put the user into the props. Otherwise, we just return an empty props. So the difference between this one and this one is that this one, we're also checking whether the role includes the user role that was passed in, to basically say, if this was admin, does admin include this user role? And this could be a set. So if it were admin / student / instructor, if the user's role is one of the roles that's allowed to access this page, then we do this. Otherwise, we bounce them or direct them to the login page. That test is missing here, but otherwise, it's pretty much exactly the same. So that was, just to review, that was an example of under pages. The home page doesn't require I log in, so we set getServerSideProps to optional auth. All right, good call. And that, of course, has to be imported from utils SSR.
Yep.
Anything else that we should cover?
No, I think that probably does it for this.
All right. Well, as always, thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, post them on the Slack channel. It's helpful if you can make reference to the video by link, and also if you have a question about a particular part, what is the starting time of the part that you have a question about, so that we can pull the video up and put your question into context. All right. Hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching.